I would like to introduce our panel tonight. I would like to welcome Professor Gillian Young, and she's an innovation expert. Gillian, you are muted. You're still muted. Can I unmute you? Let's see. No, I can't. Gillian, you're still muted.
Hello. I'm unmuted now.
Yes, great.
That's good. Okay. Hello, everyone. It's good to be with everyone. I'm an academic by background, but I have experience as an entrepreneur in business, and I've been working on digital stuff for a long, long time. So I'm really looking forward to being part of the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Gillian. I will just go in the same order. I see Stacy Pitsilidis, Dr. Stacy Pitsilidis. She's a Vice Chancellor Senior Fellow at the School of Design at Northumbria University. Stacy.
Hi, everyone. Really happy to be joining everyone tonight for this talk, although I feel like a little bit of a fraud because I'm not teaching at the moment, but hopefully I'll still be able to tell you some things about what I think around death and the relationship to COVID. So COVID has stimulated really new conversations about this, and particularly some thoughts around education that I'm hoping to share with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Stacy. Next to Stacy, I see Professor Gloria Kondrap from the HMCT Center for Typography in the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, in California. Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, I was about to say good morning to everyone, but I know there's quite a change. I want to thank you again for asking me to join the conversation. I've always enjoyed our collaborations with Greenwich University. Hello, Mark. I just wanted to say hello to Professor Mark Thomas. I just want to make sure everyone understands that this is not a virtual background, but this is 100% real. And I'm very happy to share with everyone how the impact of COVID-19, what impact it has had on higher education and the creative learning spaces here in the United States.
Great, thank you, Gloria. As you can see that there is a sun coming in exactly on top of my face. I will fix that in a second. And then last but not least, I would like to welcome Simon Heron. He's the academic portfolio lead in architecture at the University of Greenwich. Simon.
Hello, everybody. This is really strange talking to myself like this, but I'm glad to be here, and I hope the very small presentation will add something to the conversation. But I'm looking forward to listening to everybody else. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Simon. Thank you all. It would be great if the participants could mute your microphone, so we don't have any sounds in the background, except the speakers maybe. So welcome. So it was a big discussion. It is a big discussion how art and design practices are changing in the current situation. We live in time of uncertainty. We are in constantly changing society. We don't know what's happening next day around us, not necessarily because of the COVID-19, but taking into account political, economical, and cultural disputes. We are challenging and we are challenged to rethink on the way we exist. We coexist, actually. We co-participate or co-feel or co-design our practices. So we know that higher education institutions in art and design, and in particular students, academic staff, and creative industries around the globe are going to require additional support through this difficult period. Through these challenging times, what we're trying to do here today is to have a discussion, to start a debate and scratch maybe the surface, and maybe exchange ideas and inform each other about how we can change art and design and how we can change our pedagogic practices. So what we are trying to achieve tonight is to explore alternative communication, pedagogic and creative methods that we have applied or we are rethinking or reshaping during the COVID-19. And we're trying to see how these practices can inform our society, our creative societies, and how can be more inclusive for our students, graduates, and our colleagues in creative industries. So I would like to start by thinking a number of by exploring like how it is to work from home, and how, for example, the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted our practices, our institutions, and our graduates. What is the impact, for example, on architecture, on art, on design, on making, on our practices that affects also the creative industries, where accreditation ensures that good standards within the professions are constantly maintained for the benefit of the public alike? What about the pandemic that has caused creative schools closures worldwide? We will share stories here, and I would like to start with Professor Gloria Kondrap, and I will, Gloria, you can share your screen if you want, and you will have 5 minutes to present. So I think I will cough twice, 1 minute before the end of your talk.
Okay, I will, okay, 5 minutes, I'm on. So you're right, Simon, it's very strange talking to my computer. So Art Center College of Design has always been a seamless blending of the physical and, whoops, why does it say thank you? Do you mind if I, okay, now you're gonna get a wonderful preview. Okay, now we can start at the very beginning. So Art Center has always been a blending of a seamless blending of the physical and the digital. And I think it's very important for us to think, how will COVID-19 impact the accessibility to creative learning? We have some very interesting spaces at Art Center. Right now, this would be an example of how our creative studios prior to March 13th, 2020 have been conducted. They've been extremely vibrant, almost a dance between the instructor and the teachers, packed with a lot of very interesting materials by the students and projects by the students. And although they might have been produced digitally, there's always that physical assessment, a physical critique, and the physical evaluation and continuation of the students. And this would go on week after week after week at Art Center. We have 14-week classes, 5 hours, 5.5-hour studio classes. So it's a very intensive study, and it's a very explosive study of material. So as everyone knows, being a teacher, it's an intimate dance between the student and the teacher in the classroom. There's a lot of nuances that go on in our physical spaces. Whether it's touching the student work, ripping of a piece of paper, that does happen, using a pencil to mark. Our creative environments has always been dependent upon the energy and the synergy between student and teacher. This doesn't even account for, at Art Center, the incredible amount of maker spaces that we have. That includes our laboratories, our computer laboratories, our workshops, our fabrication laboratories, our print labs, our photography labs, our fabulous letterpress studios. So until March 13th, this was our daily routine of working, a very intense physical environment for critiquing, a very intense physical environment for making. So March 13th at Art Center College of Design, there was this, I would use this term slowly or lightly, a transition to digital. It was an impact. We went literally within 48 hours from a physical creative learning environment to a completely digital learning environment. This had to do, of course, with laws in the United States about shutting down of universities, and basically everything had to stop and we all had to stay at home. And this is our 97th day at the orders to stay at home. So here we are now in a digital environment, and some people say, well, what's the advantage to this? Of course, you can learn anywhere. You can be anywhere around the world and be part of this digital environment. There's some interesting tools that we use. We use Mural and Miro for students to display their work and have their work critiqued. What happens though, we found as teachers, this is a very vacuous environment. There is not interplay any longer between the student and teacher, or between the teacher and the work directly. So we're finding, even though these are great digital tools to work with, the actual critique, the actual creative discussion between student and teacher is not the same. We're not quite sure. Are you out there listening? Are you understanding what I'm saying? And as teachers, you know, part of what we do is performance. And it's true, a performance is about reaction to your audience, reaction to what you're saying or how you're performing. And when you're in a digital environment, we find that we're not getting the same reaction. Needless to say, all physical spaces of making have been closed. There is no physical making spaces anymore at the university. We're trying to think about how that can change, but at this point, this has been our environment. It's been very, I would say, difficult because of this. I would call this very distant, somewhat distant creativity and distant critiquing. This is still going on this summer. What we're planning to do and what we're working towards, and I will say transitioning, the college is trying to transition to what's called the hybrid classroom. Because of the laws, because of we're not quite sure yet, will we be able to open up? We have to practice what they consider social distancing here in the United States. Very clearly, there are going to be new rules. How many students can be in a class, where they can sit. We all have to wear masks. We all will probably have to have our temperature taken. We have to have a studio environment where we can't be more than 6 feet near each other. These will be strictly enforced here in California and in the university. So Art Center is considering, how do we do this, where we have a digital and a physical. After 6 months of all of our instructors trying to teach digitally, create the creative studio, they will probably, half the studios will transition into the hybrid classroom, where students will be able to either show up or they'll be able to learn remotely. At this point, we feel as instructors, we'll feel much more comfortable in both environments. Obviously, as creative instructors, we're very comfortable in the physical environment, and we're becoming much more comfortable in the digital environment. And in this case, in the hybrid classroom, you can see we'll have both. We'll have students who will be in the classroom, so the instructor will be able to physically teach again and critique again. And at the same time, the Zoom will be present, so students who are not in the physical environment will be able to experience at least the physical environment and participate in the class. Whether or not we'll have a completely physical classroom again, we're not quite sure. The school is working towards making accessible to the students all of the maker spaces, because we really feel it's important. Part of creativity is to have the physicalness of creativity. Without the physicalness of creativity, Art Center feels that learning how to be a creative is not the same. It'll change, it'll have to change in a digital environment, but we're not quite sure that that's the right path to go. So until there is a vaccine, though, in the United States, we have to observe all of the laws and requirements for creating a physical classroom. So we're going to transition, and we will transition to a hybrid classroom. This way we can ensure that the physical making of creativity still exists.
Thank you,
With that
Gloria.
said,
Are you not done yet? Sorry.
I'm not done. I'm almost done. You got to give me 2 more minutes, Anastasios, and I didn't hear you cough. Okay. And I'm going to be very fast with this, because this is the point. Physical and digital tools change, and we're finding this. Tools change with physical, and all through the centuries, tools will change how we are creative. I have the pencil, because the pencil to me has been the tool that has been available across centuries for the creative mind, whether it's an architectural drawing, or it's the drawing of a letter form, or it's just an ideation, a notation on a napkin. The pencil has been available for creative ideation. And the pencil is cheap. It is 10 cents in the United States. It is 10 cents around the world. It has not changed in the last 70 years. Our digital pencils, although they're fabulous and people are learning how to use it, it costs $99 just for the pencil, and that does not include the iPad that goes with it. So here we have an interesting problem, I think, that could happen with accessibility to tools and use of tools for the creative learning. And I question, will the transition to a digital learning environment only reduce equity, diversity, and inclusivity because of the unforeseen cost of the tools that we'll need to use to be creative? I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you.
Gloria, thank you very much. I picked up a couple of things you said, which I'm going to bring later to the discussion, especially about the hybrid classroom and about kind of classes. I'm thinking a lot about art and design being the privilege for few people only. And I'm just wondering, based on what you said, are we going back to this and how that will affect creativity? I would like to follow with Simon Heron, and I want to see in a way how architecture is going to be challenged based on the current climate. Simon.
Hello there. So I'm muted and I go share screen. And hopefully share the right one. Share. Voila! It worked. I hope now I can do the changing working properly. Hello, everybody. Just following up from that, what I've put together is just a small snapshot of, I thought of showing some where our students are at the moment as a way of providing some context to the sort of discussion. Like everybody, we're working remotely. One of the things to say about our school and our practice within University of Greenwich is that we start at year one in architecture. It's a 5-year program in the UK. And so it's 3 years undergraduate, you take a year out in practice, then 2 years in postgraduate. In year one, it's very haptic. That probably has been the biggest challenge, but it's been extraordinarily exciting to see how people have transitioned to this. But as we move through the school, we become increasingly, oops, oh, there we go. I pressed the wrong button. We become increasingly more digital. So on the screen at the moment is an image, I guess, of a historic view of the sort of practice. On the left, it's an image from a French architect in 1760 called Lecoeur. It's from the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. And on the right, we have the image of Erno Goldfinger's drafting studios. These are the sort of idea of the physical presence of these sort of things. But in a way, for many years, the tools just got slightly upgraded, but essentially it was work on paper. As architects, we work through others. So one of the things, even on this image, when you see Mr. Goldfinger on the telephone, you picture this idea of where's the work? Is it on the board? Is it in the air? Is it down the phone? Are people moving things? So architecture historically has worked through others and worked through an idea of how do you translate through the sort of ether on this sort of thing. So bearing that in mind, one of the things as a school, we become increasingly digital. For me, what is studio? Studio is a place of interaction, and it's this social interaction. Studio's a place where you meet tutors and you talk about the work in this sort of context. So if I just move forward a second, hopefully this works. Oh, I got to do this. There we go. So here's well, I don't know why I left this one in, but here's my favorite architect as endangered species in a wild landscape. That wasn't supposed to, here we go. The work is supposed to be here. So I'm going to really show you 2 projects in very short, there's only like 4 slides of each. Josh Jobson, these are hot off the press, people that are graduating this year or in very few days' time. And in this one, the student was a maker who was using our workshops. And the project was a physical representation of the invisible, the internet. So in this active model of the internet, this object here looks huge, Joe. I guess in a way it's scaleless, but if I tell you it's no bigger than an A2, and it's a series of submachines that he's made on his desktop over the 12 weeks of lockdown. So he's turned his living room into a fabrication laboratory. And in a way, this will be a snapshot of all of these ingredients, all these submachines. There's 71 characters that form this framework for the invisible. Hang on, there we go. And here's a sort of, as you start seeing these objects come together, they're very elaborate objects. They're all mechanical, they move. These are things he's built out of very simple components and objects he's got out of eBay. So in a way, he's turned a very conventional living room space into a fabrication laboratory, which I think is incredibly exciting. And for the tutors, he had a webcam above his workspace, and they could zoom in as he was making in front of him, so that he would be moving components, animating them, and then having a Zoom conversation on another screen with his tutors. Now, the next project, one of the things we did, we operate a couple of things around it, where ideas of remote desktop. One of the biggest challenges our students have is within the studio, our processing power is phenomenal in terms of the equipment that we have. These are, part of my language, pimped up machines. They're exceptionally powerful, designed for producing very high definition sort of imagery. Bethany Hurd, final year, her project's curiously about the climate crisis. And in her climate crisis, she's picked her test site of she sees as a failed city, which is Las Vegas, and how Las Vegas becomes the center for carbon offsetting by producing a sort of strange situation where it constructs its own rain by forming this aerial up at the sort of tree line to form snow, which then rains down through to this oasis of Jean on the outskirts, forming this wooded forest, which then forms a part of the sort of carbon capture that was the sort of sum of the output of the Las Vegas and power stations. So people live down in this sort of imagined landscape desert. The flights fly under this sort of cloud, but ultimately it's in the desert. So it was taking this as a sort of experiment, but I thought it was quite interesting. Here she was using power, all the power outages that we had, but in a way for us, because of this sort of remote access, the portfolios that the students have presented are here for screen resolution, but the screen resolution we've aimed at is just a slightly smaller than the formal print size. And then what we've been doing a thing for remote render service. So our students would upload their render files to university as a sort of render farm. It's a type of click and collect service. Then students will upload their files. So in a way, we took the heavy lifting. The students could work at home. They could access our machines in order to produce the high resolution images, which will then they could pick up like a sort of collect service. I think that might be my last image. Hang on. Stop sharing. Anyway, so just to sort of summarize, I'll go back. That's pretty nice. Look back. I don't know how to go back. Ah!
It's okay. It's fine.
Sorry about that. Anyway, I hope that helped or was some interest to people. I look forward to having the conversation.
Simon, thank you for that. I think that there is a discussion already here between what you said and what Gloria presented, especially on the idea of like expensive technology that allows maybe our students to think creatively. Where from the other side, what you just said is that there is technology that can allow our students to interact more and maybe making their projects more inclusive, which is absolutely great. We can discuss this after Stacy. Stacy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anastasios. I'm going to just share screen and I'll sort of get started then. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit, as I said, about death in education in the pandemic. And although this isn't to do with teaching, I think that working with public and working with education is really important also at this time, and that actually that feeds into teaching and education and other things. And obviously what the pandemic has done is it's made us think much more deeply about questions of our own mortality, about what happens to us, about our family and people we care about our students and what they might be going through, and the invisibility of other people's lives. So I think it's really sort of set the mood for this. In addition to that, we've seen communication, visual communication, and also graphics and other things showing kind of representations of death during COVID. And mostly that's around the kind of mass of death. It includes a lack of individualization. There's the kind of obituaries that we've seen across the New York Times paper. We've seen them in Italy as well. We've seen the mass graves in Iran, which is the lower picture, and the kind of knowledge of that. But we've also seen a whole lot of other material being shared online through groups like Life, Death, Whatever, and the Lost Project, which are sharing different kinds of visualizations and using graphics in really interesting ways. Before COVID started, I'd been doing a lot of work with libraries. Since around 2016, I've been working with libraries. And as you see, it's been very physical. And it's included also, I was previously working at the University of Greenwich and working with students there. So my work has traditionally, since 2016, involved students and involved also alumni and working with alumni and kind of building things and being physical with the making and having books and having tickets and things that people can pick up. And I felt like that interaction was really important to the project because it helped people understand and see what these different options and choices around death and dying might be. And there was the kind of performativity to it. So when COVID hit, we'd actually just been awarded a new grant to work over the next 18 months with libraries in London, Kirklees, Yorkshire, and Newcastle. And we were trying to figure out what to do with this grant now that we had to stay at home and that all the libraries were closed. How do libraries stay the center of community when they don't have their physical spaces and their physical buildings? And actually, we found out that libraries can do incredible things without those books and buildings, and actually that libraries are communities. They aren't spaces filled with books. And so the libraries have done a lot of work to pivot what they do. And they've worked online, they've been working with kids, they've been telling stories, they've been running challenges. And we felt like to pause our project because our grant holder said, well, actually you can pause for 6 months. And that didn't feel right to us because we felt like this is the moment where people really need support around bereavement, where people are dying in hospitals and people can't say goodbye to their loved ones, where people are, being asked to not attend funerals or crematoriums. So we felt like the need to talk about death was really complex. And we actually redesigned all our visualizations and graphics to really explore this kind of mood. And again, working with an alumni from Greenwich, so a recent graduate, which we were able to employ through the project funds. We've been working around kind of book quotes. We've been working around online reading groups. So we've had Kate Mayfield, The Undertaker's Daughter, Kevin Toulis talking about the Irish experience of death and My Father's Wake, and upcoming Catherine Mannix talking about With the End in Mind as a palliative care doctor. And these events have really taught us a lot about running things digitally and about our experience of death and dying. They've brought in, as others have said, an international group of people to explore this, but they've also allowed our events to be much more accessible in ways that we hadn't really thought about. So for example, people with disability, with chronic fatigue syndrome, with MS, with other kinds of movement difficulties might find it really difficult to get into some of these spaces, but also might register it for an event and then not be able to go on the day because they have a flare-up or something else. And actually the online event and the format of kind of streaming into Facebook Live allowed them to be really actively part of this conversation and really help them to engage in it. Other things, I don't think you can read them because they're a bit small, was a kind of book club that we ran on Instagram, which asked people, tag a book that makes you think about death in a new way, tag a character that taught you something about grief and how to survive loss, so trying to help bring these moments of sharing together. We also did some work with the Marie Curie Hospice in our area, which were meant to exhibit some of their art therapy work in the physical libraries. So we ended up running Facebook galleries and kind of Instagram galleries with them to create a kind of virtual gallery. One of the really important things that we learned as well was that in this time period, because so many people are furloughed, we actually had to make sure that it was really lightweight and that it was really easy for both the staff to put together, but also for people to attend. So building that kind of balance of how we kind of worked with libraries that have had 80% of their staff furloughed has been really interesting and innovative and really exciting to kind of be part of and see the kind of response from the public. We've also built a collection of online resources, which I think might be quite useful for education and particularly for anyone experiencing bereavement. And they're available on all the libraries' websites. So the libraries have used a system called, I think it's called Bookbox, but I think I got it wrong earlier. But you know, you can see, you can just download all these books, and we've put together book lists that are about death and grief that help people understand it, from children to adults, with everyone in between. We've also put together support lists and kind of numbers that people can call and stuff. And we've been running online death cafes too for people. I also wanted to just close sort of that thought by talking a little bit about design students. And I think that some tutors and other people will experience working with students, especially at a distance, that have experienced quite recent loss. And I think that following, you know, the Arts Council report and others, there's a lot of benefits that can be had through making and through experiencing kind of death and loss through art and design. And I think that although it can be really difficult to know if someone's had a loss, particularly when we're working these digital formats, it's really important to engage with the students and to bring up those kind of conversations and to talk to people about it, not necessarily in a kind of public forum, but just to check in with the students. And I wanted to just show you this project from Rapalas, who was one of our students quite a few years ago. You can see this project on his Instagram, Rapalas Vinyas. But he talked really beautifully and poignantly in a book that he designed about his father's death from cancer. And I think that just shows us how people can use the medium of art and design and visual communication to explore death and grief, and how fundamental that is during this period of time during COVID. Thank you. Oh, yes.
Thank you very much, Stacey. It's good to see that, talking about education in general, it is more about how design or digital arts could actually act inclusively, regardless of, as you said, of disability, gender, or vulnerability. So I think it's a good point to go to Gillian, where I think that she's going to talk to us a bit about how all this kind of digital presence is changing culture. I think I have the presentation for Gillian here, so I'm going to share my screen now.
Okay. I should be unmuted. Unmuted, I mean, sorry everyone. Great, okay. Now, what I want to talk about really is, how do I get my second slide on? That's good, okay. Is really related to thinking about digital culture. Just to give people a sense, I've been researching and teaching digital areas, both theoretical and applied, for nearly 30 years now, and I've also been undertaking digital projects, including internationally, over that time. And I draw and I do a lot of applied work now in the entrepreneurial area, particularly working with design and design thinking. And I come to the current situation with all that background behind me, and I'm wondering why some big questions are not being asked, because I think they're really helpful to some of the areas we've been discussing. And one of them is, higher education has been forced to go online, and people have been forced to work online in this crisis. Things that could have happened 20 years ago now, and certainly 10 years ago. And I think part of navigating some of the issues that we are is about asking ourselves those big questions. And I'll give you an example about that to do with institutions. Because I've worked a lot in cross-cultural and in development contexts and in empowerment contexts with the digital, I've worked very much with the horizontal power of the digital and the horizontal disruption of the digital. And I don't think that we can forget the extent to which, if we enter the digital through an institution, the hierarchical nature of that institution, whether it's a working environment or an educational environment, is likely to impact on our understanding of what is possible digitally and on our horizons and imagination around what is possible digitally. And I am very clear from all the work that I've done that the power of the digital is horizontal. It's actually when we make different horizontal connections. So people have begun to talk a bit about digital culture now, I think very appropriately, and I think it's very exciting that we are. But I think we need to take culture seriously the way that the area of cultural studies does, and understand that culture is about what we put into it. It's about what we create. It's not a given. And I think it is a time to interrogate the extent to which digital culture, to some extent, is understood as what we do online or what we put online. But behind those things, you know, sit all the values and the imaginative possibility about what we do online and what we put online. So I think what I've commented on in this crisis, and that's not to be critical of everyone, I think great work has been done and great imagination has happened. But the question I've been putting is, you know, are we really developing digital pedagogy? Are we really developing new pedagogic paradigms that make the best of online and offline? And when we're talking about physical making, you know, there is a lot that could be contributed to physical making dimensions, particularly in terms of peer context, getting students to work in different peer ways with each other and with experts as part of the process of making, that could be really powerful in pedagogic terms. And it's the same with blended learning. You know, blended learning is not just about what we put online and what we do online. It's about what works best online, what works best for students in groups on their own, what works best in big groups, you know, it opens up all sorts of possibilities. So I think I am really hoping that particularly in higher education, there is more attention to what actually goes into that digital culture basket. And I've just put a few things on this slide that we need to think about. There are many, many more. And what's exciting for me, because I'm working much more on design thinking now in different contexts, is that I think the whole focus of design thinking on users and values and process, it's a really clear structure to help us build digital cultures. And just in closing, I would say that I think that cultures in the digital arena need to be thought of on so many levels. You know, they can be thought of in terms of very small groups. I've been in projects that have had thousands of emails in them over 2-3 years between people who've never ever met one another, and then they meet one another suddenly in a working group or whatever after doing all that work. There's so many ways in which we can think of digital culture at the very micro going up to the very macro level. And in order, I think, to take it seriously, we need to do that. And for me, I mean, I've been exploring these kinds of things, but not in this way with my students ever since teaching the internet in the early days. But I think it's an incredible journey of discovery. I launched one of the first MAs in the world on internet studies at the University of Leicester, and I was teaching undergraduates then as well. And I always treated those courses as in partnership with my students, because although I had expertise, they were coming with different expertise. And I do think that young people have a lot to offer to the strategies that we develop now. And I think particularly in the creative and arts and design and architectural area, I think students will have loads of great ideas about how we should be doing this. And I really think that we should work with them to achieve that. That's okay, that's me.
Thank you, Gillian. I think that we can open to questions if you would like to use the chat, or if you're brave enough to unmute. It might be a problem because if there are more than one people that would like to talk, so it might be better if you want to use the chat and ask questions. So I would like to ask a question to all of you. Actually, you talk about blending in from your own perspective. You talked about blending learning, and Gloria talked about bringing together the digital and the physical in the studio. Simon said about the current project and how students are adjusting to the new normal by bringing the making and the art within their own studio, their own space. Where Stacey, you talked about how this, how the digital and digital death goes away from the higher education and informs the society. Where Gillian is questioning about how that is changing our culture and how it's changing the way we exist in the society. So I would like, if you want, I would like to start with Gloria, and then the same question will go to Simon, Stacey, and Gillian. So how do we address, if we can address, these tensions that the new environment creates and between the disciplines? How do we address tensions that actually engage people or engage disciplines together?
It's an excellent question, and I think higher education would be, as Gillian said, needs to look at other levels of culture and how they're dealing with working with, the digital environment and how they use it. I mean, there are so many different levels of how people communicate today, physically and in a digital environment. I think in the United States, one of the greatest examples is what's going on here, unfortunately, between the physical protesting that's going on in the United States. We're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of people on the streets with handmade signs. I mean, ignoring the fact that we have COVID-19 and being extremely physical. And then at the same time, an incredible amount of physicalness in the digital environment about the same issues. So we have both operating the same messaging, but in two different environments. So I think they're showing the importance that the cultures find both environments, the physical and the digital. And Art Center is actually addressing this. I don't think they're ready to be completely digital. And I don't know, and I have to say this, I don't know if it's fair, and this is for Simon, to ask the student to create their own environment at home, their own studio environment at home when they're learning, when they expect a certain amount to come from the institution that they're paying for higher education to provide for them. I mean, I think, unfortunately, until the institutions learn how do you create this blended environment, it puts a lot of pressure on the student to say, you have to create this physical studio in order for you to physically create something. That's it.
I think I should come back at that point.
Yes, I was about to say, Simon, do you want to come in?
I'll work backwards. I'll start from, I want to sort of contextualize, I'm not mute. I want to contextualize what I was talking about. When this one individual produced his workspace at home, it was by no way asked of him, or it was required of him. It was his own decision. And I think something about the nature of what studio is Studio, I think it's a very different studio than you might experience in the States. I haven't taught many places, but I have taught in SciArc. And there, where the students, a lot of our students will work, especially in the master's program, predominantly they're working in offices. When they say they're part-time or full-time, they're working in offices. So they're always remote, more predominantly working remote from us. They come to us as a service center, and there are two primary services. The principal service is to have an exchange of conversation. So it's a meeting point. They come in as a touch point to meet their tutors, to access the library, obviously, and their peers. So it's a conversational weekly touch point. Outside of that, yeah, sure, we have all these workshops. I think the thing that has challenged people has been not have access to the workshop. But next year, we're planning to extend our click and collect service so people can dial up and download their digital model making, export it to the workshop, who will then print their objects, and they'll then collect their own like Airfix kit of components to take home, if that needs be. And the way we're looking at it, we think, I mean, I have to say, my view of technology, it's an augmentation. It's not a rejection of the past. It adds to, and I mean, there's been all sorts of unusual things here. I don't know about you and other institutions. We've never had such a comprehensive window of all of our students across all years in all types of work as a sort of digital backup. So as a sort of backup, it's quite an unexpected bonus of this.
I agree, Simon, I agree, 100%. It has been an incredible response.
Yes, I think, yeah, you're both right. I think that you're trying to say more or less the same thing. Simon is approaching from the student possibilities and opportunities within their own space, where what Gloria is communicating here is that the studio practice is without the studio practice, we are lacking of the social discussion. You talk about like socializing and discussing about design, about the arts, and I will agree with both of you. I want Stacey to come in that discussion and tell us a bit about how this tension affecting our society today, or the people.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. And I think one of the issues is a lot of our language, a lot of our communication is embodied. So, you know, we're doing a lot of this on Zoom, kind of like moving our hands around and kind of trying desperately to get you to understand what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking, particularly if you're Mediterranean or, you know, of that way inclined. Yes. So, you know, when we're running things like the online death cafes, and we want to understand if someone's disturbed, if someone's feeling like this is too much for them, if someone wants to talk or wants to jump in. I know that's probably a really difficult thing with students as well. You know, how to stop someone speaking, how to give someone else the floor to speak, all that kind of chairing becomes much more complicated in something like a Zoom environment. And we tried to really limit our numbers, which we could obviously because we weren't in a teaching classroom or in that kind of environment, but we limited them down to around 9 people in a session because of the fact that on a 9-person screen grid, you can see everyone's face quite clearly and you can look for those visual cues and signs of what's going on. And again, I think it's really worrying in some ways that if you don't see your students every day in that detail, that you might miss things and things might be going on in their home environment that you won't know about. And I think that's the really challenge here with the digital space. And maybe Gillian's got some ideas of how to combat that, but that's sort of been what I've been finding.
I think, Gillian, that was an easy one. So Stacey, thank you.
Yeah, I've got so much I'd love to say about embodiment, but I controlled myself because I've done feminist work on embodiment, and I'm really, I think Anastasios, I have said that to him. I'm in that strange place of having been an academic for nearly 30 years, and when this crisis hit, I'm sort of in limbo in that sense. I've said, for me, being an academic is about being with my students and my colleagues and being on campus. So even though I'm a digital expert, I think, it was worse because I was a dean and I'd be managing people and helping colleagues to do this. It would have been a real struggle for me. I think it is hard to replace the embodied. But the thing I just wanted to share about, as I said, from my own direct experience of that challenge that you've articulated about how you work online together, is that drawing up rubrics, which I've done with students as well as about how you do that in itself is part of the learning that we all need to do. I think we should have been doing it a long time ago. And as I said, I did it mainly in my project work. Because I think that it allows us to, and I mean, it's easy to do that with something you're doing online, because you can have a very short form of how the meeting will be run and how people will contribute or whatever. And when people sign up to the meeting, they agree to do those things. We know that people don't always stick to it, but if you have the rubric there and you have to interrupt someone, it's a lot better than it not being articulated. So I think that it sounds, I know, a little bit naive when I say this is a journey of discovery, but the reason that I feel it absolutely isn't naive is because I think that a lot of people don't know how to work online, and that actually that is something that, as Simon was saying, it augments everything if we know how to do that. And from an entrepreneurial point of view, I think it opens up a lot of opportunities for students. And the other thing I didn't say when I was talking was about networking and this horizontal rather than institutional level, because different forms of networking are always possible online. Completely new forms of networking are always possible online in terms of which communities and how you enter them. I worry that when we're doing all this teaching online, we are not teaching students in a network within networks capacity. And this would apply to the work you're doing as well. So it's this thing of the reason that we're helping people to network is to help them access the other networks themselves outside of this. So it's really odd to me, and I could never teach this way, that one would teach a module or whatever, that it wasn't really carrying that ethic of it's connecting students to that world of networks.
I had this discussion this morning with a researcher in wearable technologies, where she said to me that artists, especially in this current situation, they find it extremely difficult financially, based on the idea of they are not able to maybe support themselves. And I know quite a few artists that they are not able to support themselves based on the current kind of COVID-19 pandemic. So she said to me that it's giving me finally the opportunity to reconnect and with my network, and also to meet more people from home, because now people are available to meet. So Jim Hobbs, it's the MA. The program leader for MA Digital Arts in the University of Greenwich, is asking questions in the group chat. He's saying that he's curious about how the notion, ideas, practicalities of time are challenging the teaching, pedagogy, and the reality of how we work in the new online systems. Like a text conversation, so much gets lost and miscommunicated between the lines. Any of you would like to answer this? It's the question is on the chat. So, Stacy?
I can't actually see it on the chat.
So she's
is it sent to you, or is it sent to everyone?
Actually, he did send to me. That's good.
Okay. Would you mind copying it into the chat?
Yes. Sorry, guys. Sorry. Yes. Okay.
Okay.
No, he did. Okay. Jim did. All right.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah. I think that time has been a really interesting thing. I mean, as I said, I'm not teaching at the moment, so I can't really comment on the teaching side of it. But I know that my colleagues had to turn around what they were planning to do within a weekend. And I think Northumbria was one of the first universities that went to online teaching. So on Friday, they were on campus. On Monday, they were online. And it was literally that fast. And I think that other universities have done the same thing. And I think that the time that our colleagues have in comparison to, moving towards the summer, which is meant to be research time, finding time to take annual leave, finding time to produce, work that they were trying to work on, the ref is upcoming, all these things muddled together in line with reinventing a whole way of teaching is a huge ask from academic staff and is very difficult. So kind of finding that space between the lines to kind of understand what the new digital space is and what it means and how to import those things that Gillian said about digital culture into teach. I can really understand where the struggle is. I'm not sure if that was the heart of the question or not, but
I think that Jim is trying to say that I think we're going back to the basics. So Gillian mentioned about the internet and the way that she was developing a program with the students. And I will take you back to the way we've been texting to each other without having the option of video conference or the sound or the image, where we have to add, or we do even now, we have to add emoticons in order to enhance this kind of text dialogue. And I think that what Jim is trying to say here is that we are sometimes, this kind of communication, it becomes miscommunication. I think that Nick would like to add something here.
Yeah, it's just building actually on what Stacey was saying about the short amount of time we've had to adapt to these tools. I think that it also is the case that we've taken tools and repurposed them. So, I mean, none of the things we have right now, especially Zoom, are particularly perfect, and Teams and the others are not any much better. They're just a bit different. I think there have been, in the past, richer types of collaborative tools. I think of Autodesk and others. They've produced a variety of ways of collaborating, which obviously are not widespread, and therefore a lot of places, Ravensbourne included, my institution, have taken things off the shelf to make it work in a short space of time. So I think the pragmatic angle of trying to get this has overshadowed some of these other questions, which now I think still should come to the fore. And since it looks like we're going to be collaborating online for some time, we ought to be looking at other tools and trying to find ways to put those to the fore and perhaps understand that sort of basic interactive element better.
Great, Nick. Thank you. Simon says how to raise a hand like this, Simon.
Oh, you can. Of course, you can see me. I keep forgetting my camera's on. Sorry, I'm so used to working in Teams where you have a little button that you raise a hand to say politely, I want to join in. So for those of you that don't work Teams, I do apologize as I contextualize myself. I mean, I don't know what you guys think. I'd be interested what some of the people in listening here have to think about this. I found time and space have really got very strange in this process. My very first Teams tutorial, it started at 10 and it finished at 9, and it was one long session. We're just jumping in and out. I hadn't seen my students by this point for like a couple of weeks, so it was so exciting. We lost time. 6 weeks later, it's tedious. I'll be shared with you, right? I think the first time there was a sense of novelty. But I think one of the things that happens is, on a serious note, how time shifts. I think something we all have to be conscious of is some of these processes have this sort of impact on time, even practically between sort of operational time and people being able to sort of have breaks from their workflow. In terms of preparing people, one of the things we did was we bought ourselves a pause break where we asked all of our students to write a reflective statement, to do a sort of micro state of the nation of their portfolio as a sort of document. And this was a very practical thing. At that point, we had no idea how many people might fall ill. We had no idea what might go wrong. So if one of us became, and some of our tutors did become really ill, actually. So suddenly to have a working document that somebody could pick up from the students. So we did it very gently. We want to find out how they are, where they are, what equipment they have. It was a sort of audit. And that then allowed a sort of framing thing, which bought us the time to naively learn how to use these new tools. So I think for the moment, it's worked. But the one thing, if I put something out to everybody else, the thing that's been the hardest is this idea of the community. And for us, one of the challenges, I believe, I think that, you know, that ideally we would have these sort of, when we say blended, small, we work in studios that are quite small size anyway. So to have these sort of probably rotating students through the school, so you see them on a rotational basis, and some online element. But I think the biggest challenge we have two challenges. One is continuing students, to make them feel part of something, and how they then can become mentors and support arriving students, because coming to university is so much more than the course, and it's about coming to university. And I think it's important, and that's what a lot of us at the team are sort of thinking about, how we can think of ways to construct these studio shells where people can share, you know, whether it's people talk about film clubs and these sort of things. I think that we need to have some way that goes beyond the direct one-to-one teaching, because otherwise these tools exist, but I think it's the other stuff that we need to bring in. I think the conversation about learning from the young, who probably spend more of their time on some of these applications than I might, I think it is true.
So I'm very conscious of time. So Gillian is typing on the text. If you would like to go and say a comment about blending learning. I have a question for each of you, which I would like you to answer within 30 seconds, if that's possible. I have plenty of questions actually, but I will be happy to host another event to discuss this further. So Gillian, I would like to know more about what is your view about the future of the creative economy. We are in a situation where our students, or creatives in general, will be challenged in the next few years. And then the economy will be challenged based on the current situation. What do you think that is, how do you think that the creative economy will change, if?
One of the big struggles that has been on for a long time, and that people like myself have been engaged in, is fusing the creative area much more deeply with technology. And with big data and artificial intelligence really being big moves now, and 5G, I think that is an area students should consider. And of course, I'm not just talking about students who are techies. And things like the digital catapult, which are meeting places for that, and Innovate UK and everything. There's lots of possibilities there, but I think that will be one important trajectory for students starting new businesses and finding other opportunities to work with technologists.
Thank you, Gillian. There is a very nice comment from Tracy here as well in the chat. Please feel free to go and have a look. Very good points he's making. Gloria, I'd like to ask you about a bit more about creative industries. What creative industries should take into account when they're hiring 2020 graduates? That's a massive discussion now about what to expect from these graduates.
Well, I think we're still at a transitional point right now. We haven't left perhaps the traditional way of learning, or what has been pre-March. So a lot of students, I know at Art Center, they've been able to experience the physical and on-site learning. So they're leaving and graduating with a community. I think moving forward, it will be interesting to see what happens a year from now, 2 years from now, when someone enters this environment at either a completely digital or a completely blended community, to see how that affects them in terms of how they are approaching or responding to industries. We actually find a lot of interest from a lot of companies, Anastasios, from yes, and they're mostly, well, beyond tech companies. We're still finding a lot of, manufacturing companies, packaging, tech companies, very interested in looking at the student work. And I think in a digital environment, they're able to look at work in a wider format now. You know, they don't have to come to recruitment to the physical space of Art Center, where we're creating very interesting and exciting environments for, you know, potential, you know, users of creativity to see the work. So I'm thinking we're just in a transitional phase right now.
Great. Simon, a question that we talk about, the two of us, quite often. How do we maintain high standards in art and design during this lockdown? Is exhibition visit still relevant? Is going to a museum still relevant?
Yeah, I mean, if I can pick up from the last point and join those two things together, I think I was really mindful listening to our VC communicate to our community, and this idea that we're in an extreme event, but it is a transitional event. We will at some point move out of this. I think we have an obligation, as well as managing the present, which we need to be conscious of. We have a responsibility for the future. We have a responsibility there are some very big things still floating around there that haven't escaped us. Climate change and the catastrophe that's falling upon us, and the extraordinary transitional changes of our economies that are taking place. So in that future, we need to prepare our students to be, to operate in that uncertain future. We need to give them tools, but we need to give them some sense of hope that they can contribute to it and develop that future. So I think that there's a danger that we get very fixated in the present and we lose sight of these extraordinary big things, even if these reoccurring cycles of disease become more reoccurring. We still have a responsibility to construct that future where this stuff exists within. And I think we have that opportunity to think beyond the immediate.
Great. There's a very good comment from Maria in the text box about miscommunication, and she wants to point out the creative potential of miscommunication and how miscommunication can become a vehicle to discover something else. Stacey, a final question for you. You talked about digital death. Being online, I assume for all of you daily for more than the expected hours is tiring, and perhaps you in a way you're losing the time when you are online on the internet and trying to catch up or trying to communicate. Do you see it as the digital death? Do you think it's the death of us being online and with developing kind of new habits or new approach to what online is?
I think the kind of ideas and questions go a little bit back to the idea of embodiment again. It's like our relationship to the screen has changed. It's become very central to our lives. So we need to build in patterns and different ways of doing things. I mean, I just moved into this house. So my first idea was to set up my office, to set up my studio. And that was actually quite cathartic, this idea of creating a space that I can work and live in, a space that I can leave behind. And, you know, things have emerged from that. I mean, you know, we were talking about drawing and marks on paper and things, and, you know, stuff sort of seems to come together. So my week looks a little bit like we have, you know, 3 p.m. on a Thursday, we have a feminist tea chat with colleagues in one kind of building in the university. On another day, we have a fika, which is a Friday kind of coffee gathering and kind of evening, sometimes pub drinks, which have now gathered into kind of a series of talks on Wednesdays where we had colleagues from the university, but also outside coming and giving talks. I've also got a twice-weekly meet up with colleagues in America and in mostly in, I think they're based in sort of California sort of area. And we've been working on a COVID white paper together, which we've released recently, which is all about death, grief and bereavement and virtual funerals. So I think it's the pace, and I think that's sort of what Jim's going back to Jim's comment at the beginning, the kind of pace of the digital and our relationship to the screen and the way that we create these patterns when we go outside, how we go outside, when we're in front of the screen, when we get up and walk around. And, you know, after having like 6 hours of Zoom meetings, I realized that that was too much for me. My eyes were scratching and itching. I wanted to scratch them out, if that's not too visceral for you guys. But like, you know, so then I tried not to schedule that. And obviously if it's possible not to, then that's obviously a better scenario. But yeah, I think the patterns are really important.
Thanks, Stacey. Just to conclude, in front of me, I have a number of questions I can ask you for another couple of hours. I'm going to name some of them so you can take away and think about them. We talk about the hybrid classroom. We're talking about, like, are you listening? Are the students listening, or are people listening to us? We discuss about creativity for few. We talk about inclusive education. We talk about adjusting to the current situation through technology. We discussed about how diverse and inclusive we are in our methods, or how we can change societies. We talk about how the idea of culture and how we're changing the culture, the online culture, to something more personal. So there are a number of things there that we can definitely, Nick, if you would like to host us again, we can answer these questions here in your platform. I'd like to thank our presenters, Gillian, Stacey, Gloria, and Simon. And I would like to say a massive thanks to colleagues and all of you that you joined us tonight. I'm really sorry we had to take 10 minutes more from your time. And last minute from Stacey, Lee Bennett is there. You can have a look on the chat box. And this session will be recorded and will be